King Lear, late at night on the cliffs, asks the blind Earl of Gloucester, "How do you see the world?" And the blind man, Gloucester, replies, "I see it feelingly." And so do I. As Colger said 20 years ago, I decided to give away everything I owned with warm hands and I broke. And he's right, so far we're right on budget. So why did I leave the world of lobsters and Learjets in exchange for shelters and slaughterhouses? What made me do it? To take nothing but pictures, leave nothing but footprints, own nothing but memories, kill nothing but time. Something happened to me. You see, I had been to Dante's Inferno without Beatrice for my love, nor Virgil for my guide. The Greek poet Horace says, "Change only the name, and my story is also about you." So this is where I work today. In China, 7,000 magnificent moon bears, their limbs torn off in traps, are imprisoned for 26 years as a catheter drains bile into a bucket which the Chinese drink. 26 years. The bears go insane. In Korea, dogs are beaten to death in the marketplace because the butchers believe that pain and suffering makes the meat tasty. In South Africa, 5,000 tame orphan lions are killed with guns, spears, or torn apart by hunting dogs, and they call it sport. In Canada, 300,000 baby seal pups are clubbed and skinned alive on the ice, their tiny hearts still beating. In Australia, our animals are sent on death ships to the Middle East, where their eyes are stabbed out and their tendons are slashed. In Asia, dogs are suspended on hooks and skinned alive for fur-trimmed coats in the West. And we treat our oceans as our private pantry and as a public toilet. The Pacific Gyre now is so full of plastic, junk, and human feces, it has created a floating island bigger than India. Dolphins and whales are stabbed to death in the shallows of Japan and Denmark, and huge bays are blood red. Factory farms spew chemicals into the ocean, creating hypoxic dead zones totaling 1 million square kilometers. I don't know if you've ever seen photographs of this, but our oceans are so full of toxic acids, it's killing coral, ocean animals, and plants. So-called unviable dairy calves that cannot be sold for veal are killed by farmers in Australia by hitting them on the head with a hammer or jumping on their ribs and crushing their hearts. Billions of bouncy little chicks are ground up in mechanical mincers simply because they are male. And religious sacrifices around the world make the 21st century look like the new Dark Ages. And children starve because their croplands now produce meat for foreigners. I have no more photographs for you, but this is where I work. The oceans are dying in our time. By 2048, all our fisheries will be dead, the lungs and the arteries of the earth, poisoned by the chemicals from the livestock industry. Trillions of fish are ground up into pellets to feed to livestock. Vegetarian cows are now the world's largest ocean predators. In human history, only 100 billion human beings have ever lived. 7 billion humans live today. And yet we humans torture and kill 2 billion sentient living beings every week. 10,000 entire species are wiped out every year because of the actions of one species. And we are now facing the 6th mass extinction in cosmological history. If any other organism did this, a biologist would call it a virus. It is a crime of unimaginable proportions. You see, the world is crying out for only 2 things: leadership and the truth. Today, I'm just going to tell you the truth. The wise Chinese have a word for it. It's yang jiao. Listen to the friend who tells you the truth, even if it hurts. So let's just tell the truth, fearlessly and forcefully. That's what the Sanskrit word satyagraha means, the truth force. Rudyard Kipling wrote of young men dying in World War I, and if they ask you why we died, tell them that our fathers lied. And Edmund Burke wrote, for evil to prevail, all it takes is for good people to do nothing. Doing nothing is no longer an option. I have long admired Count Moltke, the Prussian general, who preferred to think rather than to talk, a man silent in 7 languages. You see, it takes courage to stand up and speak, but it also takes courage to sit down and listen. You see, I heard the screams of my dying father as his body was ravaged by the cancer that killed him. The screams were terrible. And I realized I'd heard those screams before. In the slaughterhouse, on the cattle ships to the Middle East, and a dying mother whale as a Japanese harpoon explodes in her brain as she calls out to her calf. Their cries were the cries of my father. They were identical. And I discovered that when we suffer as equals. And in their capacity to suffer, a dog is a pig, is a bear, is a boy. Victor Hugo said, there is nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. Well, here is an idea whose time well and truly has come. Animal rights is now the greatest social justice issue since the abolition of slavery. And you can put that in the bank. The anthropologist Margaret Mead said, never doubt that a few committed individuals can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Well, there are only 13 million Jews in the world, and yet they play such a wonderful, vibrant role in international affairs. Tibet's population is only 3 million. But who hasn't heard of the plight of the Tibetan? But there are over 600 million vegetarians in the world, and that is bigger than the United States, England, France, Spain, Germany, Italy, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, all put together. If they were one nation, they would be bigger than the 27 nations of the European Union. And despite this massive demographic footprint, they are still drowned out by the raucous hunt and shoot and kill and cartels who believe that violence is the answer when it should not even be a question. The great historian Barbara Tuchman defined folly as acting against our own best interests. That's folly. So let's just examine our folly. Zoonotic diseases like SARS, mad cow, and avian flu now threaten a pandemic to rival the Black Death, which wiped out half of Europe. Nearly 70% of the people in the West are now overweight or obese. The risk of fatal prostate and breast cancer is now significantly higher for meat eaters. The risk of a heart attack is now 50% for meat eaters, the same as tossing a coin. For vegetarians, it's only 4%. And medical science now says that the optimum amount of meat in a healthy human diet is precisely 0. Medicare has now bankrupted the United States. They would need $8 trillion invested in treasury bills just to pay the interest, and they have precisely 0. They could shut down every school, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, CIA, FBI, and they still will not have the funds to fund their long-term liabilities. So having big health budgets while still continuing to subsidize and consume meat is utter madness, like putting ambulances at the bottom of a cliff. Occam's razor, or the law of parsimony, would solve all these problems with just 3 words. Don't eat animals. As Einstein, a strict vegetarian, noted, we can't solve problems using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. Well, as you will know, water is the new oil. Nations will soon be going to war over it. Underground aquifers that took millions of years to fill are now running dry. As a young Boy Scout, as a teenager, I drilled my first water well, and we struck sweet water at 80 feet. Today, we're in the same area building an orphanage, and we're 800 feet, and we're sucking mud. At one project in China, we're at 3,000 feet, and the drill head is still dry. So why am I telling you this? Well, it takes 50,000 liters of water to produce 1 kilo of beef. It takes 1,000 glasses of water to produce 1 glass of milk. 1 billion people today are hungry. 20 million people will die this year from malnutrition. Reducing our meat consumption by only 10% will feed 100 million people, and eliminating meat from our diet will end starvation forever. I'm sure many of you know that forest depletion now costs 3 times as much as the current global financial crisis, and it happens every year. And food prices are skyrocketing. In the United States, corn prices has gone up 50% in the past 5 weeks. It used to cost me for Thai rice $197 a ton for my projects in Asia. And then it went up to $1,015, a 5-fold increase in 5 months. And poor countries sell their grain to the West for hard currency, whilst their own children starve in their arms, and the West feeds it to livestock. So we can eat a steak. Am I the only one in the room who thinks this is a crime? Believe me, every morsel of meat we eat is slapping the tear-stained face of a hungry child. When I look into her eyes, do I remain silent? The earth can produce enough food for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. Dostoevsky asks in The Brothers Karamazov, is the suffering of one child worth all the wealth in the world? And he answers an emphatic no. Well, if everyone ate a Western diet, we would need 2 planet Earths to feed us. We've only got 1, and she is dying. And greenhouse gas emissions from livestock now exceeds those of transport. Cars, trains, buses, ships, lorries, the whole lot. The melting Siberian permafrost is now a ticking time bomb. When it releases its sequestered gas, the game is over. Scientists predicted that the Arctic summer ice would disappear in 40 years. Then they changed it to 8 years, and now they're saying 2 years. The Himalayan ice fields are correctly called the third pole, and they feed half the world's population through the Indus, the Brahmaputra, the Ganges, the Irrawaddy, the Yellow River, the Yangtze. And those icebergs are melting fast. Believe me, all the good that Muhammad Yunus did in winning his Nobel Prize will vanish when Bangladesh drowns. And we freak out here in the West when 1,000 refugees land on our shores. Imagine greenhouse gas emissions reaching 500 parts per million, or a 3-degree temperature rise. That will create 100 million eco-refugees, and that calamity will reshape the geopolitical landscape forever. We are facing the perfect storm. If any nation had developed weapons that could wreak such havoc on the planet, we would launch a preemptive military strike and bomb it back into the Bronze Age. But we can't. It's not a rogue state. It's an industry. The good news is we don't have to bomb it. We can just stop buying it. So George Bush was wrong. The axis of evil does not run through Iraq, Iran, or North Korea. It runs through our dining tables. Weapons of mass destruction are our knives and forks. The Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. The meat industry will end because we run out of excuses. And farmers are the ones with the most to gain. Farming won't end, it will boom. Only the product line will change. Farmers would make so much money, they wouldn't even bother counting it, and I would be the first to applaud them. Governments would love us. New industries would emerge and flourish. Health insurance premiums would plummet. Hospital waiting lists would disappear. Hell, we would be so healthy, we'd have to shoot somebody just to start a cemetery. You see, the peace map is drawn on a menu. Peace is not just the absence of war, it is the presence of justice. Animals are not just other species, they are other nations, and we murder them at our own moral peril. Justice must be blind to race, color, religion, and to species. If she is not blind, she will be used as a weapon of terror. And today, it is being used as a weapon of terror in those gulags we call factory farms all around the world. And I speak to good, decent people all around the world. And they all genuinely want to change the world, as long as they don't have to change themselves. But life doesn't work that way. First we change in our hearts, and then the world follows. True leaders must face their own demons courageously. Peter Niemöller, the German priest, philosopher, and U-boat captain, spent 8 years in prison for condemning German intellectuals for being cowards. When the Nazis came for the communists, I remained silent. I was not a communist. When they locked up the Democrats, I remained silent. I was not a Democrat. When they came for the trade unionists, I didn't speak out. I was not a trade unionist. When they came for the Jews, I remained silent. I was not a Jew. And then they came for me. And there was no one left to speak out. True leaders must speak out and must act courageously. Please do not major in minors. Is it not better to light a candle than to curse the darkness? All the darkness in the world cannot put out the light of a single candle. You see, I believe another world is possible. And on a quiet night, I can hear her breathing. It will be a difficult battle. But remember my hero, Mahatma Gandhi's words. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. The last sentence of Scott Fitzgerald's book, The Great Gatsby, reads, "So we beat on, boats against the tide, drawn back ceaselessly into the past." I ask you, are we to live forever in a sick, smug, and cruel past? The past has not served us well. We are not bound by it. Let's not relive history. Let's make history, because that is what leaders do. They make history. Our animal cousins have survived millions of years of evolution. They've earned the right to share this planet with us in peace. They have waited long enough. The brutes and the bullies have been Goliath, but David is coming. Maybe he's in this room. Maybe he is one of you. And if not you, who? And if not now, when? Thank you.